March 20th, 2025 at 6 p.m. and is being recorded. Is there any public comment? Is there any public comment?
Nobody in the waiting room.
Okay, seeing none. John and Dave, you read the minutes of February 20 meeting?
Yeah, I get the minutes.
Yes.
The only thing I saw was you have that, you made the motion.
And John did, yeah.
And I accepted it.
Yeah.
So I made the motion and John accepted it.
I can correct those.
That's so. That's the
Okay.
only amendment, but
Mhm.
other than that, I accept motion, I make a motion to accept the minutes as read.
I have a second.
I will second the motion to accept the minutes as amended with the change in the
Right,
water rates.
okay. All in favor, Johnson, aye.
Dave Meswar, aye.
John Kane, yes.
Motion carries. Okay, elderly rate application is Paul Gallerino, whatever, 14 Great Brook Drive. He meets all the necessary requirements, and that's the only one we have. I have a
I make a
motion,
motion to accept the elderly rate at 14 Great Brook.
I have a second.
I will second the motion to accept the elderly rate application for 14 Great Brook Drive.
Okay, all in favor, Johnson, aye.
Dave Meswar, aye.
John Kane, yes.
Okay, motion carries. Okay, then we got the elderly rate, the commitments, February 2025 commitments for 140, which we can sign later. Okay, DPW report, Randy.
Just a couple items. First, we're at the end of our current bill cycle, so Beryl will be working on bills. Done a little preliminary work so far, but we'll be issuing bills mid to late April. For the October to April 1st bill cycle. It's time of the year for us to develop the annual statistical report.
Yep.
Beryl and Kevin are working on that. It's due end of the month. So at the next meeting, we'll report back some of the, numbers that we always look at each year,
Okay.
the unaccounted for water and the gallons per capita day.
Okay.
Those are the big numbers we look at each year. The budget for FY 26 was submitted to the Select Board and Finance Committee. There was a joint meeting with both boards on March 1st. John and I were there. So those boards have everything. I'm assuming in the next 2 or 3 weeks, that budget should be finalized.
Yeah, they didn't have any questions, because I watched it on.
Yeah, no
YouTube,
questions.
so, yeah.
Number 4, more of a carryover from the last couple of meetings. We are planning some vacuum excavations during the spring and summer. That's for the lead service line inventory. And the last item 5, Jeff Vitavelli will come back in the springtime for some more factory inspections.
Okay, and what do we got here? Work order summary, Sam West Road, meter inspection, pump station, okay. Didn't they have a water break at the old candle shop? Right there, the old candle shop there on College Highway, didn't they have a water main break there?
We're looking.
Right there, the old cam, I don't know, I can't think of it, it's right up there it's right on College Highway. The old candle shop, this house that's way back off the road, just past the DPW.
Oh, yes,
I saw
well,
the trucks there and they were digging and,
inside there was there's 2 services. And one of them is in a building that the meter froze.
oh, okay. Yeah, 'cause I saw Kevin there in the back over
Yeah,
there.
he was in
Yeah.
the back, yeah.
Yeah,
So
okay.
we had
I just happened to go by and see him there, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. The old business, anything under old business? New business, Randy, accessory dwelling unit policy.
Yeah, so are you familiar with accessory
Yeah.
dwelling units, ADUs? So this is something new to Massachusetts. I wouldn't say new, but there was a regulation adopted last year which basically made ADUs allowable by right as long as in the residential zone. So a lot of other towns are going through the same process of how to manage ADUs in particular, with the utility connections.
Mhm.
So I got my first phone call about a potential ADU about a week or 2 ago. And we don't have anything in place right now, but I think it's a good time to have a discussion. Planning board is working on a bylaw to regulate ADUs. That's underway now, and I imagine that will be discussed and voted at the upcoming town meeting in May. But in the meantime, the bylaw is not gonna get into the level of detail as far as requirements for water connection. So that's a policy that we'll have to develop ourselves and manage. So I've looked at what other towns are doing or have done, and really there's no rhyme or reason. There's no one way that overrules the other. Most the requirements are to have separate services for the ADU. Or if they are separate units, separate buildings on the property, they would have one service coming in with 1 meter. Then after that meter, the service would branch off, and that would branch would feed that secondary ADU on the property on the building. So I guess I want to get your input. I don't need an answer today per se, but I'd like to put a policy in place probably for our next meeting, have a discussion anyways, about where, which of these two options we think we should land on. I think my preference would be to have separate services for both.
Me too, yeah.
I think it makes, there's pros and cons of both options. We're gonna have 2 services, so 2 meters, 2 bills, more legwork on our end. But I think it simplifies things a little bit too, and you don't know where things are gonna land in the next 5, 10, even beyond,
Right,
where these, what is a accessory building now, accessory unit now, I guess, but could potentially be broken off into some brand new property with a new property owner.
Yeah.
So I would lean towards I have a couple options here, but lean toward option 1, which is to have a separate water service to both buildings.
yeah, that's what I would.
I said, some other towns have just one service, 1 meter. And some other towns are basically said, whatever you, developer, property owner want to do, either of these 2 are fine for us. So I said that there's really no rhyme or reason. There's no one, I say it's probably pretty close to a split amongst those 3 options where other towns have adopted policies. But I want to get some input from you. See where your thoughts are, and we can put together a policy for the next meeting to talk about and discuss and
Dave?
adopt.
John?
Yeah, I see. If you have an accessory residential dwelling on your property, that's usually to have a family member. But when that family member is gone, does it become a rental property? So making the 2 services makes it easy
Right,
to split it off into a rental property, but if you don't want all these tiny little rental properties being handled by a homeowner on the same piece of property, you can just say, you gotta pay for the water for your rental unit too, and get it back through the rent. Kind of slow down that process of, if it's split off, your mother-in-law, you throw your mother-in-law out, you can rent it to anybody and they get the new bill, so I see benefits to both ways, and honestly, I'm agnostic. I don't care which way it falls, when the planning board comes, they may say we want separate utilities, and that makes it easy, but who knows where they're gonna land with it, it's the same with electricity. Do you run another meter? Do you run another meter into that unit and pay for separate electricity, or,
right,
Well, I think that when you add a separate service, now you're starting to make it not so much an accessory to that building, but now you're making it a separate
Yeah.
entity.
And it makes it real easy that when somebody moves out, to just rent the place to somebody as opposed to just recovering it back into your home.
Most like with the rental properties that I have, the water is billed to the owner bill, and it never switches hands between the renters. The thing that I see happening is, like you said, it's most likely a family member. So would this service be eligible for the elderly rate? Right, because that's gonna give us kind of a, they're not necessarily the head of household, but they're the head of that water rate, and then,
right.
so would it be eligible for the elderly rate application process? Or would it just be that the ADU is based off of the owner of the main property? So I think we might have a little bit of an issue there, by separating the services.
Yeah.
And then how do you go back, like, say either the person passes away or they move on to a different, living situation? Do they come back and say now, oh, now we're renting it to somebody? Well, they're not gonna tell us. They're gonna keep getting that elderly rate until they can't anymore. The other thing, like we were talking about, is adding another tap to that main. You know, some of these mains I think might be getting a little old, and then digging down into those could potentially cause a problem. But to the other side of that is now we have a brand new service, you know, so if there was a problem with that main house, they could still, you know, they could potentially
Yeah.
feed
It's
water.
really hard because there's
Right.
pros and cons to both ways. and-
Right, right, it is.
I mean, I could
It's
see
just
it
a matter of what kind of headache you're gonna get from each one.
Right,
being a
right,
you know,
exactly.
the option to do either or might be beneficial depending on, you know, the location of the building, the location of the accessory building, whatever current, you know,
Mhm.
service is there. You know, some of these houses are old, and they have small lines where, and then we're gonna get into an issue of, well, this service isn't providing enough flow, right? So I don't think we can necessarily require them to run it through the current service. So I think that maybe
Yeah.
the option, you know, based on what would work best, but at the same time, I think we're gonna get into that gray area of the water rate,
No,
you know, being split, and then who's, you know, who's doing the watering,
Mhm.
of the, you know, that kind of thing. I
Yes,
just,
that's a good point. I would see it more as kind of like a rent, almost like a rental unit on the property, right?
Mhm.
So I wouldn't see this, I wouldn't see the ADU qualifying for an elderly rate. Cause if the person living in that unit is not the property owner per se.
Right.
Right, the elderly rate only applies to the person who owns the property. So maybe the main property, if that person's out and living in the home, would qualify, but probably not the
Right.
ADU
Right.
property. Unit,
Yeah, that's where we gotta set up, so,
that's how, yeah, if you follow current
Right.
policy.
right,
On the flip side, right, elderly, the ADU is more likely gonna have, one person living in the home, gonna have less water. In a lot of cases, it's a family member, gonna be an elderly family member, which not gonna use a lot of water. So it's a flip side, to that as well,
Yeah.
the money part of it. How much water they expect to use.
the other issue I see with the split service. I'm just, you know, arguing both sides of it kind of, but. Now someone moves out and I see these ADUs being really popular and then not popular, and then people's family members don't necessarily need them anymore now. Do they want us to shut the water off and then not bill for the meter and all that kind of thing? I think it does get it's gonna be a learning experience, I think, throughout.
oh, yeah, it is, it's gonna be a learning curve.
So the initial
Yeah.
policy, I think, is gonna be up for discussion for sure, and not just through our board, but through the other boards too, whoever, how
Yeah.
planning sees it based on other towns and what the state is, eventually
Mhm.
gonna mandate down.
I think at the very least, we should state our policy that the ADU will not be eligible for elderly rate,
Right, that's in our
Unless the
procedure, yeah,
main
we already have
property.
that in our, right,
you know?
we just gotta make sure we state that.
Yeah, if
'cause
you
it's
want, I
already in our
can reach
procedures.
out to some other towns and get their policies and we can see
Yeah.
what some other towns have put together.
I kind of have an issue with that because I think that the best intention of the ADU is that, say you take over your parents' home, you take over the deed or whatever, so you own the house, but now your mother or father, they're living in this ADU. They might not use the amount of water, but if they do, then there's gonna be pushback for sure. They're like, hey, if the water is being billed to this unit, then it should be eligible for the elderly rate.
Yeah. Yeah, as long as we're clear that the homeowner is, the rental properties are not, are not eligible anyway.
Right, they're not,
We have to be clear right from the start,
right,
so they don't run the irrigation off the.
Well, that's,
elderly rate.
that's what I'm, if you go that route,
Yeah.
then you're gonna do that. That would be the smart move, is to,
Yeah.
utilize that
Mhm.
water service to do your watering and your extra
Yeah.
usage and fill your pool and that kind of thing. I mean, that's just a smart thing as a bill payer to do. But if the current policy is that rental properties are not eligible for the elderly rate, then I think
Right.
the idea is to treat these like a rental property.
right, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely,
So,
We gotta be
in
clear
that
with that,
policy,
right,
rental
Bob?
properties and additional dwelling units
right,
would fall under that.
Yeah, just to make it clear, so.
right, yeah.
We're
we
not
gotta
arguing
make it
with
clear,
everybody who builds one, as to who's gonna be living there and what kind of rate they're gonna be paying,
right,
so.
Mhm.
And let's face it, if they're elderly, the elderly rate is the low tier. And if they never make that 15,000 gallons, they're still on the elderly rate. Essentially, you know?
The other issue I could see with requiring a separate service is the cost to install it. You know, if you're, especially these are gonna be in backyards, you know, much further than the normal service would be, so if it's all priced per foot. It's gonna be quite expensive for a lot of these units to get water. And I think that's gonna be an argument from people that the idea of this is to make it an affordable unit for family members, you know, and then if we're requiring a $15,000 water service to their backyard, that might get kind of hairy for everybody. I think it would be good to find out what other towns are doing and, you know, because if they've already put policies in place, they've probably done the research and looked to the state for some guidance to an extent.
Yeah, there's very little guidance from the state. So everyone's kind of on their own. I've talked to some other towns. And like I said, these are the options that are out there, and there's no one that, you know, seems like it's more favorable than other from others,
Yeah.
other
It
towns.
just
It's really,
seems like-
it's really a matter of personal preference.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Seems like a wash.
And there really is, in my mind, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just, what do you want your policy to look like? That's what we're gonna figure out.
We should definitely have a clear policy
Yeah.
as far as billing, but
I agree, absolutely. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think that requiring to either have a new service or not allowing a new service, that might be maybe up for some more discussion, but I think there should be the option. You know, I know like if my house, if I were to put one, I don't really have a great spot for it, but if I was in my backyard, I could run 20 feet of pipe. You know, whereas if I had to run it from the street, now you're talking 100 feet. You know, it's quite a bit more, probably
Mhm.
200 feet of pipe.
Concern is, like, we have some older services, you know, like 3/4 inch, maybe even
Right,
half inch.
right. That's the other problem.
They're not gonna be able to feed two units.
yeah,
So that would
I
be on
can
the
see that.
property owner to have
that's
to,
something for the property owner to.
they gotta consider when they decide they wanna
Right.
build an AEU, absolutely.
Yeah, they may wanna.
I can see that
Throw
happening.
another service in, just to have the other service back into the house
Right,
eventually. Change it up.
Yeah, because there's some more services out there. So,
So I mean, there is an option if you have that second service and you're using a lot of water in your primary home. That you're gonna wanna go and use that service, you know, especially with the way the rates are. To kind of restart back at 0 gallons or 15,000, you know, if that's the minimum billing.
yeah,
So I can see it getting kind of
mhm.
interesting at that.
So right
Okay.
now, if we have like a 2-family unit, they got 1 water meter going in, you know, they're billed basically 2 times the minimum bill.
Mhm.
So their minimum bill is based on 30,000 gallons, not 15,000 gallons.
oh,
So
okay,
we gotta decide if we wanna have the same policy for ADUs. You know, if it's going through 1 meter.
Yeah.
Now you're billing it, you're getting the minimum twice
right,
or not. So a lot of things to think about.
yeah. Well,
Yeah, I think I think there's a few objective issues that we have. That definitely need to be addressed. The fact that it's a rental unit, I think is. It's the idea. But also it's kind of the idea that it's not a rental unit. You know, it's a family member's additional area, not. I think that's where we're gonna get some pushback for sure.
It could be, but it could also be a rental property as
It
well.
can be, yeah,
Right.
but
And your point is, we'll never know if when that property, if someone, you know, passes away and then now they would decide.
Right, we will never know,
exactly.
We'll never know when that transition takes place.
right, they're never gonna tell
And
us,
then, so now we're not gonna capture that in the bill. In their bill code.
I can see that happening too. I can see that
And
happening,
then in the same regard, now that, you know, if you have a family of 4 living in a house, they're gonna be in that second or third tier. And now all the water that unit's gonna use through their house is now at the 3rd tier level, so. That's quite a bit larger expense for minimum usage.
Yep.
Yeah,
okay,
So we can do some more research
Yeah.
and, Baron, so we'll make some phone calls and.
All right,
Paul,
yeah,
I think
next
the
meeting.
questions, the discussion about the billing is good, you know, something I think about, so
Yeah.
we should look into that a little further.
and with the, you know, water usage, you know. Basically, you know, per capita kind of thing too, at the same time as. If we have more water services, is that gonna reduce our. Per capita
Right.
usage, you know, which could be beneficial when it comes to the rate, you know, the
Right.
water restrictions and
Yeah,
whatnot.
yeah, it could.
So I think it's, it's important that we have a set policy so that we don't have to go case by case to try to figure it out, but I think we have to look at the intention of it, I think, is to have a space for your, for your in-laws to stay or your kids to stay. Of course, they're gonna become rental units at some point, once your
Right.
in-laws are moved out or your kids have moved
Right.
on. So I think that's how they need to be treated. But yeah, there's definitely, it's a lot more, I think, complicated to nail down a policy. I mean, it would be nice to say, okay, yeah, just put a separate unit in, separate service. But I think we're gonna get a lot of pushback on that too. But if we have a definitive, approach to it, then I think
Right,
it's
absolutely.
a good choice either way.
Yeah, we can do some research, Randy, and get it back to us
We'll
next
do that.
meeting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Is there anything else under new business?
So we were talking about the water restrictions just now. And we talked about the water permit and everything. I did talk with Nick Baldiga a few weeks ago about how we can go about getting this permit expedited or whatnot, and it doesn't seem like that's an option. The only option to benefit the people using the water extensively during the restriction would be to go to the select board and ask them to change the bylaw and remove the fine or change the fine schedule. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but with all the water usage and with the spray park not being under the water restrictions and that kind of stuff, I think a lot of people have come to me upset about the water restrictions and the fines being in place. I don't have a problem with the restrictions, being, hey, try not to use water, but I think the fining people, might be a problem, especially once we see the spray park come to fruition. It's gonna be a point of contention for a lot of the water users, especially now that we've raised the rates. So I don't know how you guys feel about recommending select board revisit that bylaw, but that's the only way that we can really adjust that restriction whatsoever.
I don't think I can see if you get rid of the fines, they're just gonna water and they don't care.
Yeah.
That's my
Yeah,
point.
I
They're
don't
just
know- I
gonna
don't
water
see
and
any enforcement whatsoever.
you gotta have some type of enforcement, I feel. I mean,
I don't know, it seems like we're already 30% higher than the DEP's recommendation. And just to go to the select board and say, hey, let's just do a free for all, we'll be 50% higher, maybe 100% higher before we get to anything, and then the DEP's, they gotta come down on somebody somewhere,
Yeah.
And since we're the only permitted
Yeah, I think
the
there's
only
one other
permitted
one.
system
There's
in the area, it only makes sense that they're gonna be coming after
Cause
us.
Westfield's gonna start, you see what they got told? They gotta start finding people. Do you see that in the paper?
And not in the paper, no, but I know
I read
that,
the whole article
I'll have to take a look at
and
that.
DEP came down on them and said, okay,
So this year, I think will be a bigger year for water restrictions for other towns. We've been going it through for 8, 9 years now, right? So the DEP's finally caught up with other towns where I think a lot of them this year will be required to go into restrictions.
Westfield is required. They
When-
gotta
when
do the
we
same
will.
thing that we're doing.
Yes,
So much for the first offense, second offense, it was in the Westfield paper. I read it.
yeah, they must have adopted
And
a
DEP
policy.
finally got a hold of them, and said, you
Yeah.
will.
Yeah, but the town sets the penalty. That's kind of where I'm
Yeah,
at.
Yeah, they're right about where we are, I think. I think the fines are just about where we were, I think.
I think DEP has some sample language, which we copied, and I'm sure it's probably what Westfield other towns have.
Yeah,
I
I'd be
think
happy.
they're all in that same $50.
I'd be happy to do to the planning, to the select board, what they've been doing to us for years, and just say, you want the fines changed, go see the select board.
Well, that is,
And just make their meeting more noisy.
that's who sets the policy for the
Yeah.
fine. So that is who can change it. That's what we've come to
Yeah,
realize, is that the select board is the one that set the policy and set the bylaw and the fine schedule. So I
Yeah.
think that's,
That's in the town code, town bylaw.
yeah, it's a town
Right,
bylaw.
right,
do what they've been doing to us. It's in the water department.
yeah.
Go yell at
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, like I said, I don't. Having a water restriction with no fines,
It's,
the DEP is gonna come back and say something to somebody, if they've already told Westfield they gotta do it. and we come out and put it in the paper that we're not gonna have any fines, I think we'll get a phone call the next day. So,
What, that might be the leverage we need to get them to come and revisit this permit, you know, that might, you know, having that kind of exposure. But
yeah,
that's the only way that we're gonna,
or yeah, we could have the select board stand up to them and say, we're not fining anybody until we get our permit.
that's basically what I'm
Yeah,
kind of getting at.
I'm interested how that would work too.
Yeah, right.
So
like-
we are
it's like
making some
bluffing with
progress
a
on
pair
the
of
permit
twos.
for what it's worth. Well, I did have a meeting maybe 2 months ago around December, and there's some things that I'm working on now. To you know, get that permit hopefully resolved soon.
Okay,
Yeah, it's taken a long time, and we're starting to see the wheels move so slowly,
Okay.
but they are moving right now.
okay.
Do you see it being more or less restrictive, or just being updated and being kind of as it is?
Is going to be as restrictive as it is now. That's not gonna go away.
Yeah.
There are some other, so as part of this renewal, we're also looking to increase our withdrawal, right?
Right.
So we're looking to increase our withdrawal, which is not a lot, but because you know that they're formula 65 gallons per day, right? They tell us, okay, here's how much you should be using.
Right, so we're, yeah,
So there's a little bit of an increase, which we're allowed to request through the new permit. But we had to provide mitigation. So I remember at the last meeting, we talked about some mitigation, like
Right.
stormwater infiltration, purchasing land for preservation purposes. We're able to buy mitigation credits by those activities, and we have enough credits, I think, to capture that. It's 40,000 gallons a day is basically all we're allowed to ask for an increase of.
okay,
So we have enough credits to compensate for that, but there may be some other strings attached that will come along with a permit, and I'm not sure the details on that right now. I know one thing that they have mentioned in the past was, if you remember, it's just, so August is the lowest flow month of the year, right? The driest month of the year. So there's more water going out of our basin in August than is coming into the basin. So what they want us to do is, well, how can you bring more water into the basin? And one of them is, well, buy more water from Springfield,
Mhm.
water from outside, bringing it in. And so that's, on paper, that sounds okay, but there's a cost, right? Buying
Mhm.
water, there's a
Right,
big
right.
cost for that. So there's a trade-off, there's a trade-off. But I think it's still worth going for the 40,000 gallons of water a day that, you know, I think we will definitely use. But it just may come up from other attachments.
Yeah, I just, with that upgrade we did to connect to Springfield Water, you know, we spent $1 million, almost, well, more than that, when you
Yeah.
include the pump station and all that. I feel like if there's that option to do that, you know, if we're doing that anyway, we're buying water from them. We're gonna, you know, by finding people, you know, per day or whatever, we're not gonna offset the cost of buying the water. You know, I think that's the water that's included in our rate.
Mhm.
But the problem I see is if Springfield doesn't have a limit on how much we can take, then I don't think we should have to limit how much we can give out. That's kind of where my problem is. We spend $1 million to connect to Springfield, so we don't have these water problems. Then we're gonna allow a spray park to hook up to it, commercial use, you know, for whatever reasons. But then limit, you know, the highest taxpayers' water usage, you know, because you can't water your lawn, you know, you can't wash your car. There's a couple other restrictions, right? So that's where I have an issue of imposing these fines when we can when we have West Springfield pulling out of our same aquifer that's not tied into the water use restrictions whatsoever. So we're literally letting another town suck off of our tank, but we're not letting our own ratepayers do that. So that's where I think, you know, the fine, I don't think we can't go against the DEP's permit and say we can't impose a water restriction, but we are able to reduce or remove the fine or the frequency or however, you know, we don't have that power, but the select board, under our recommendation, could go back and revisit that bylaw to effectively, I guess, circumvent the water restriction, because we have a direct connection to not an unlimited water source, but a somewhat unrestricted water source. I know Springfield will sell us as much water as we want to take.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, right? Cause the more water they use, the more expenses we have. You know, we can only draw, our permit still says we can only draw 1,000,000 gallons of water a day from our own wells. Anything beyond that's gotta come from Springfield.
Right,
So if we're more water we're buying from Springfield, the more
cost is gonna
our
go up.
cost is gonna go up.
Yep.
Yeah,
So we got to plan for that, you know, with the budget process, you know, we went up a little bit on our rate this
We didn't go
year.
up that much, but we went up a
But we
little.
went up based on what we expect the new bills to be, but we're not expecting any increase in usage
Right.
to Springfield. So those are things we gotta, you know, make sure the budget's balanced if we're making a decision like that.
how often are we at that 1,000,000 gallons a day? You know, when we're using water and during a restriction in the past. You know, cause there were years that the fines weren't necessarily imposed or enforced. Were we ever reaching that limit, you know, and then how much more were we having to buy? Yeah, cause I understand once we suck that number down, we have to get it from somewhere else.
Mhm.
And how often do we get to that point where we need to take that water?
So the
Or
summer,
required to take
summer months, almost every day.
Almost every day.
Okay.
So winter months, our usage is, Kevin would know better, but we're probably averaging 500 to 600,000 gallons of water a day.
Okay.
During the winter. That, you know, doubles plus in the summer months.
Okay.
You know, we're eating 1.1, 1.2,
That's what
probably,
Kevin was telling me last year when I was.
yeah, between 1 and 1.2 is probably an average summer day, and then we've got some peak summer days where we're at, 1.4 million.
So what trigger, like, when is that valve open from Springfield? Is that based on our usage or it's just on like the main pressure?
It's a pump station, so it runs through our SCADA system.
Okay.
And right now it's set up to run however we tell how often we tell it to run. So I think right now Kevin runs the pump station once every day or every couple days, really just to keep the water fresh.
Fresh, yeah.
Right,
In
yeah,
the winter, in the summer months, he'll run it every day. And he has a schedule usually. I mean, he follows the trends.
Mhm.
And so he'll plan on running it, for 2 hours every day, Monday through Friday, from 8 to 10 or some schedule like that.
Mhm.
So it's pretty consistent in how much we bring into the system, and then if the tank levels do drop, there are also triggers through SCADA that tell, okay, we'll tell our well 1 or well 2 to turn on. And if well 1 or 2 can't keep up with the demand, then it tells Jerry Drive, okay, now you kick on.
yeah, kicks in, yeah.
So to offset the costs and the amount we're using from Springfield, could we draw more water during the winter, maybe run that pump station? You gotta run it to keep that water clean and fresh, but could we run it, every other day or run it for an hour? Then I know there's a cost to get the pump ramped up and then shut it down. But would there be a way to offset this additional amount of water we're buying? So we could buy more in the summer to meet the demands of the water
It's
users.
every day though, so it's summer months, it is, during the winter months, it's not an issue at all. We could run the town on well 1 or well 2 all day long.
Yeah.
And not draw from Jerry, we just draw from Jerry just to keep the water.
No, I
fresh.
know, so I'm just saying to offset it cost wise, so if we were basically. Say in an average year, we take, just for round numbers, 10,000,000 gallons, I know it's quite a bit more than that probably, but. Or say 100,000, whatever, so let's say we take 10,000,000 gallons from Springfield. Over the whole year, could we try to just take that during the summer? More so, to offset our water usage when we're trying to water lawns. And then use our own wells for the winter time, for the cost wise.
So the withdrawal is a cap per day.
Yeah,
Every
so,
day.
yeah, so in the winter, when we're not meeting that cap,
Yeah,
we don't use the Jerry Drive only to cycle it, just to keep the water fresh,
Right.
which saves the bill, right? Cause it's not going through the meter.
Yeah.
And in the summer, when we need that water over the million, we haven't used the money for it in the winter time. That's, I know you can't draw more than that,
yeah,
but just to offset the costs.
yeah, we can try to cut it down further, is that trying to you minimize use during the winter
The
months?
winter, yeah,
Yeah.
minimize the Springfield water in the winter so that in the summer we can draw more of it, but the cost over the whole year
Yeah.
is the same. That's where then we don't have to worry about the water use, let us use 50 or 100% more. If the total cost and usage from Springfield is there, I mean, that's why we put that line in,
Mhm.
I just think it's a way we have plenty of access to water and with our rates the way they are, I think there's definitely a need for us to revisit the enforcement of the restriction. I know they're requiring it to be in water use restrictions, but there isn't necessarily a required fine for it. And we have the option, you know, we're not gonna, in the summertime, right? Because if we're planning on buying more water from Springfield, we're not gonna suck our aquifer dry because anything over that already, we have to get from Springfield. If we can just figure out financially how to make it a smart move, and then we don't have to, you know, penalize people for going over that. And with the data we have through the SCADA system and stuff, I mean, we can see over the last trends, you know, when we need that water and how we can, you know, how we could flow it back and forth.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, I don't think we overuse waters we don't overdraw from Springfield now.
Mhm.
So I think, you know, I understand what you're trying to get at, but I don't think if we try to cut it back further, I don't think there's much further to cut it back.
Mhm.
Like I said, we really just run it to keep the water fresh.
Yeah.
Keep the pumps moving, you know, keep
And then that's
everything.
it, right? You shut it down,
And
right?
then we run it for, it's like running for a half hour to an hour when we do run it, really just to cycle water through the transmission main, so it's fresh water coming into the system.
Yeah.
So we can look and maybe scale down a little further, but I don't think you're gonna get a whole big savings by trying to compensate for the water we need in the
Yeah.
summer months.
The best
We just-
policy would be just to budget to buy more water, just start.
So
You have to buy more water.
from Springfield, so I think, so the thing that I see, right, is the tier 3 10% increase. When you get to that point, you're watering your lawn, you know, in the summertime, so you're already paying substantially more for that water, and we kind of have that in there because we expect to be drawing it from Springfield, you know, to have to make up for that flow. That's where I see the problem with the water use restriction. It's based on our aquifer, but we're also tied into an essentially unrestricted water source for now, until they come to Springfield and say, hey, you're not allowed to do this. And then that'll be a whole nother discussion when they cap our water usage. But then we'll have a good idea of where we're at when people are using water the way they see they want to use it. You know, then we'll know, hey, we have some argument to go back to Springfield when we're sucking 300,000 gallons a day from them to say, hey, this is what we need. You know, because if they're looking at it now and they're saying, oh, well, you only need 100,000 gallons, that's how their permit's going to be written to what they can give to us. So I think, you know, it's a whole kind of chain of events that could transpire either way.
I don't know. If you take, yeah, I'll tell you, if you take the fines away, people are just gonna water. I'm telling you.
Well, I agree with that, and I think that they have the right to do that, especially when they're paying for the upgrades that we've done to be able to bring in more water.
I understand that.
You know. Cause the problem I see is this isn't a water conservation problem for our own well, because we already are at that limit no matter what. That limit's set 1 million gallons a day, regardless of water restriction or drought or whatever. But if we have the option to go and purchase more water, and the people who are gonna be using more water are already paying the highest tier for that
Yeah, I think,
additional amount of
I think
water.
the philosophy is watering the lawn with drinking water. You know, no matter where it comes from, you know, if we buy more water from Springfield, we're still putting drinking water on the ground, which, like Randy said, in August, that makes sense.
Right.
We're recharging our aquifer by watering lawns from Springfield. You know, so if we want to budget more,
Which that's a
put
good
in
point.
Springfield.
So during that drought season, when we're
When
not
we're
getting the
pulling more
rain,
water,
we would be,
we're
recharging our-
actually helping West Springfield because they can still pull 3 million gallons a day.
yeah.
So
So that's the real problem, is that we're giving water to another water system while we're being restricted out of the same tank of water, essentially, you know.
Yeah.
We have one bucket of water. We have to maintain that bucket of water, but this guy can suck it dry. We wouldn't even know. And we wouldn't even be allowed to suck it dry before he did.
Yeah.
No, well, West Springfield has a permit, they have a cap on their daily withdrawal as well.
What's
As
their
well.
cap?
West Springfield does.
yeah, didn't they go back to the register?
They did, it's around 3 million gallons, but that's total, I'm not sure if that's just their well field in Southwick or if that's all their water sources, but I think it's around 3 million gallons. Is what they're allowed to draw per day.
Well, I can tell you, West Springfield's using considerably more than 3 million gallons a day. If you had all of their water sources, I could imagine. So if they're if they're able to draw 3 million out of our aquifer and we can draw 1 million, then I mean, that's a problem, number one. If the intention of the water restriction is to save our drinking water for our water system, it's being depleted by another water system that's not under the restriction. And I think that's where we just haven't, discussed this much to figure out what's really going on. But if we have the option to buy water to help recharge the aquifer, but also another water system is drawing out of that same aquifer with no restriction, the restriction is kind of silly. It's not,
Yeah.
the intention of it is to save the
We're-
aquifer,
if
but
our
it's not.
well, we're in a water restriction. West Springfield should also be in one.
Right.
Yeah,
Regardless, they should have the same water restriction.
And-
I fully agree with that, but.
Right.
That's something that the DEP, we need to push back on the DEP
So-
saying we're not gonna be in we shouldn't be in a water restriction because we got one kind of water system and they have a restricted, registered water system and they don't have to
so
go
that's,
in a water
so
restriction.
I agree, and so I
But
think the way that
I
you,
think I think West Springfield is gonna be moving into that area. I don't think the DEP, the Water Management Act isn't gonna be saying this is Southwick's water. It doesn't belong to Southwick anymore. It belongs to the state.
it belongs to the state, absolutely.
Right.
And
And then the state is
People
telling
in-
us that we
people in
can't.
Cape Cod wouldn't be able to even have enough water to flush their toilets sometimes,
But Southwick is responsible for maintaining the area above the aquifer
Yeah,
and the restrictions we have on our development, on our commercial property, everything is based on that aquifer. Over the aquifer area. So if we have to limit our usage of that space, we're required to maintain it. That's a cost for us or a loss for us, depending on how you look at it. And then to go to our water system users and say, hey, you can't use water because DEP says it's not good for the environment. But that's really not the intention of that.
yeah,
And I think the best way to push back on DEP is to say, to suggest to the select board that they either reduce or remove the fines and that we're serious about getting this problem figured out, because we have a growing town with a very high tax rate, tax base that needs to be looked at as more than just this little town that's gonna take care of someone else's aquifer and give them
Yeah.
water when they need it,
yeah.
so. I would like to see the fines removed, especially when the intention of the restriction is to preserve our aquifer, but that intention is a moot point when someone else can draw as much as they want. And we have the option to buy water from Springfield.
Yeah, they can't draw as much as they want, but if they're not restricted in watering their lawns when we are, and they're pulling from the same source, that doesn't make any sense. That's not a Water Management Act. That's,
Right.
That's not water management, that's
yeah,
controlling who
that's
gets to
theft.
use the water. Yeah, I mean, that's
basically
extortion,
theft. 100 years ago, this was Southwick's water,
Yeah.
You guys wanted it, you had to buy it from us, and now it's not.
Just like we have to buy it from Springfield. So I think that's another option, maybe that was an issue that was years ago that we let go or overlooked, that we allowed that to happen. And let them come in and take our water, but
Yeah.
to
I
limit
don't
our,
know, do they pay? They must pay some kind of.
So I have a stack of file probably this thick going back in, I'm gonna say 60s or 70s when West Springfield purchased the land.
Yeah.
And built the wells, and it was very litigious at the time. I know that there was a lot of disagreements between both communities and I did see a draft. It was not the final, but there was a draft where West Springfield would pay the town of Southwick, a set rate per gallon or per 1,000 gallons, but that never made it into the final agreement. And I'm not sure what happened in the meantime. I'm sure, lawyers got involved and, threats were made but so basically the way it's set now is, West Springfield owns the property. They have the rights to draw water on that property. And that's where it stood for, since they've been operating in town. So,
that's why I think the real problem I have is with the fine, to fine somebody for using too much water when number one, they could go to West Springfield and use as much as they please. And number two, we're gonna have other water users in town, whether it be the town itself or commercial properties, that are not gonna be subject to those restrictions. And I think our biggest base of ratepayers is residential water usage. I know a lot of people that spend a lot of money on their lawns, they wanna wash their cars. Which is another, stormwater will be another issue, but that's not for us to decide. They pay premium property taxes and they're paying, tier 3 of a 10% increase. The least we could do is give them the freedom to use that water, because we've discussed that this water restriction is not helping the environment. And if anything, like Dave said, in those dry months, we would be purchasing water through those ratepayers who felt it necessary to purchase that additional water and then recharge the aquifer. So if the argument is the aquifer is getting too depleted, well, it's most likely it's going right back into it.
Yeah, it would actually work to our benefit for Southwick to be the only town without a water restriction. Because if people were spraying Springfield's water on their lawn, the aquifer is being handled.
And at that tier 3, they're covering the cost. If we could do an assessment, but they're covering the cost to purchase that extra water. So we're not even necessarily going against the DEP's permit, right? We're just giving people the option to pay a premium to buy more water to do as they please with it. Right out of their tap, rather than having to, go to West Springfield and fill their trucks up at their buddy's house. And bring a jug of water back or something like that. But I think with our rate increase
I mean,
and
the simple answer is though, they could drill a well.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have any water restriction. I've got a well and a pond to pump out of for irrigation and I still don't water my lawn.
Yeah.
Because I don't wanna be bothered with it.
Right,
yeah.
I mow what grows.
Yeah.
As long as it's green and soft on my feet.
Yeah.
That's all I
And I'm sure there's quite a few people that do that, and I haven't run my irrigation system since I got a $900 bill because there was a break in it. I just turned it off completely. I think I pay every year to have it blown out, but I've never turned the valve on, because I'm like, I don't need the water. I don't mind my lawn getting a little burnt, and I don't have to mow it as often.
Yeah.
But I know there's a lot of people that spend a lot of money on those lawns. And they're gonna water them, and I really hate to try to argue that we're gonna fine you, X amount per day because the government says so, but there's really no necessary reason for that
I
restriction.
mean, I see the point, we're gonna fine them for refilling on aquifer.
Yeah, especially because that water is already being
Like I
purchased.
said, I just as soon have everybody go yell at the selectmen.
Well, they're the ones that set the bylaw, so that's why I would like to, based on this discussion, recommend to the select board that they revisit the water restriction bylaw and update it to match, this new upgrade we've done. And that with our increased rate at that tier 3, you're offsetting the cost of that additional water. And that's where that additional water is coming from. If you water your lawn consistently, you're gonna be in that tier 3 no matter what, and most likely you're gonna use that same amount of water in periods of time when we can draw it all out of the aquifer, and then in those shorter amounts of time where we have to buy it from Springfield. We spent $1 million or plus on the upgrade, and we're still in water restriction. And that was Representative Baldiga's problem too. He's like, we're raising the rates, we're adding different, access to water, but we're still finding people and telling them they can't water their lawn.
Yeah,
I'd like to reach out to DEP and see if there's anything that requires us to have that fine in place, because there is like I said, there's a draft bylaw, which I believe we pretty much copied word for word.
Mhm.
Is it codified that we have to follow this bylaw specifically, or are there variations that are allowed?
Right.
I'd like to find that out,
Yeah,
because there may be something in our permit, I don't know.
But if that's the case, if it's in the permit and it says that the permit's expired, as far as I'm concerned, the bylaw can be written how the select board sees fit. And to Dave's point, let the select board deal with it, let them, they're the ones that write the bylaw. We can make a suggestion to it, we're not the be all end all.
I mean, I think if we sat down and said, we're just gonna buy the water from Springfield and recharge the aquifer. We don't think we should restrict people. You know,
That's the way I see it.
place it, you know. If you put it in the wording that they want, and then say, yeah, we've got our restrictions, and we send everybody a postcard when we catch them watering, you know.
Yeah, and we say, hey,
Costs us-
just
costs
so
us
you know.
50 cents to tell them that they shouldn't be watering, and they're just gonna keep doing it, you know?
Yeah.
It's just, I think eventually the DEP is gonna say, yeah, that doesn't wash, you know, we
But
want
then
you,
that's,
we want you to get your water, you know, your per capita water down, and we want you to, and we want you to do it, and if you don't, we're gonna come down on you, and the ratepayers will be paying fines through us. You know, I think fighting City Hall that way and being a petulant child and just saying, no, we're not gonna do it will attract attention and probably get us some more trouble. But if we do it quietly, just go through the selectmen and just don't say anything and
see, I think that's, it's,
wait until they give us a hard time, or just don't send anybody out to ask, you know, to find out who's watering and who's not.
well, that's the thing. I mean, ultimately, it's our water, you know, that we're using or buying, right? So especially when it comes to buying it, you know,
Yeah.
if Springfield doesn't have the restriction to sell it to us, I don't think we should put a restriction on who can buy it from us. And especially, you know, if we have this higher rate and people want to buy that water, that's only better for the water system. You know, especially if that water the cost is being offset. Now we're flowing more water through the system. You know, it's keeping the pipes cleaner or whatever, but it's also increasing the revenue that we need to do the additional upgrades. You know, we should be selling as much water as we can take in. You
Yeah,
know, if there's people that want to buy it.
yeah, I just know that we're a Republican town in Massachusetts. And it's not gonna take them much to notice, you know,
But they're already working on the permit. We've already been restricted. I mean, what's the worst they can do? You know,
Yeah.
the bylaw, there's only 2 water
Yeah.
systems right now.
If we do it before the permit's set, they may put something in there that requires us to do it. And to fine people and how much to fine them. You know,
Which I think if that's what they're gonna do, they're gonna do it regardless.
yeah,
You know, that's already something they've thought about. This isn't gonna make the DEP revisit the fine schedule, you know.
well, if we come right out and say we're not gonna fine anybody for water, they just might add that in the next day.
But where did the fine, when someone pays a fine, where does that money go?
It comes to the water department.
So I think if the DEP isn't benefiting from the fine, we have unlimited access at this point to water. And rather than trying to extort people for the money to help our water system, we could just sell them the water they want. And we'll make more money on the water that people want to buy than the money that we're forcing people to pay for water that they couldn't use. You know? So it's my suggestion that we refer this to the select board and remove the fine. We still send a notice. I mean, if it's probably a requirement that we send a notice to say that we're in water restrictions and to limit your water usage. But we're buying water.
Yeah.
From another source that doesn't, that isn't impacted by the flow of the Connecticut or the Westfield River or by the level of our aquifer. So it's really
Because we got so many people watering, we flooded it.
Yeah,
I
I
think
guess my concern would be is if everyone wants to irrigate right now, we're running all of our pumps, all the time. And we saw that during the year of
1 year,
COVID.
yeah.
COVID, it was a dry summer, everyone's home.
Kevin couldn't keep up with it.
And everything was on like all day long. So I wouldn't want to overexert our system as well.
But that could happen even if we weren't in a water restriction. There is a potential that we could have a really wet spring, and by the time we get to the long dry season, that we still have that flow, and we're not necessarily in water restrictions. So then we're at a point where, hey, now maybe we need to upgrade the water system because we can't keep up with the needs of the people using it, you know, and I think that would be another argument, you know, or another thing to revisit if that were the case. But the idea is, I mean, if we're charging for the water, it's to pay for the system to pump that water. So yeah, we're gonna be using the pump, but if we have our system maxed out at the tier 3 rate, I mean, that's a substantial amount of money. And that might be a way that people are like, well, maybe this isn't worth water, you know, we'll back off. They can choose to back off on their watering because it's too expensive. You know, I know like my parents, they back off on their watering because the cost, you know, to irrigate your lawn is quite a bit. And I think a lot of people would say, hey, it's not worth it to irrigate, but to have that option and to say, hey, I want to just irrigate for this short period of time, but we're in water restriction, and then we're gonna see on the meter readings that you're irrigating, and then we have to go and fine you. You know, I just, for really a moot point, if the,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, so if the point of the water restriction is to save the aquifer, we've kind of argued that point is a moot point, and it's.
Yeah. I'm just wondering no, I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, what implications do we have for being over the per capita?
So we've been over the per capita for many years now.
Many
right?
years,
It's 65 gallons a day.
Yeah.
And I think last year we were 70, low 70s.
Yeah, middle 70.
We've been 70s, middle of 70s last few years.
Yeah.
So far, nothing. I mean, you know, a lot of towns go over. It's, you know, but DEP could come down and say, you know, it's been too many years, you're still over 65. They could come down and require the town to implement measures to cut water use. We've adopted some measures, right? The tiered rate structure, you know, 3 tiers now, that's one of their recommendations. Other recommendations they may have are to do more frequent billing. That's gonna cut water use, but you know, there's a perception you get your water bill every month, and you're tracking it a little closer. There could be some bylaw changes. They could ask for a host of things to require us to cut down to 65 gallons.
Yeah,
They absolutely could be out there. So
I don't wanna go up to 140 gallons a person and find out what it is, you know, I don't wanna. I'm not looking to get their attention is what I'm trying.
I hear you.
trying to
Yeah.
say,
Right.
you know, so.
But I think
Any balance we can have, watering 2 days a week, you know, just give everybody one grace day every week where, yeah, you violated, but we're not gonna do anything about it. You know, we'll send you, you know, I think some people would be happy with that, but I just don't know what the answer is, you know, like you say. Throwing all the water we can on the ground is actually helping the water.
Well, that's where you think about the per capita usage, but if during maximum usage, we can use 1 million and we need 1.3. Now we're actually taking 300,000 gallons a day and putting it back into our aquifer. You know, so if they want us to reduce our water usage, our argument is that additional usage is being put right back into our.
Yeah.
some of it, some of it goes to
necessarily.
Westfield, right? We
Yeah.
do have some systems that are both water and sewer.
Mhm.
That sewer goes out to Westfield. But you're talking about systems that have town water, private septic.
Well, that.
So it's not a full 300, it just,
Right.
you know, it's not the full 300,000 that you're talking about.
Right.
No.
Some of it still goes out.
No, but the delta between the restriction and unrestricted, right?
Yeah.
Nobody is restricted to how many times they can flush their toilet,
Mhm.
take a shower, brush their teeth, use water that would go into the sewer. They're only restricted to the water that goes on the ground. So that's where that water going onto the ground is the restricted water that would be just directly going into
Right.
to our aquifer. There's some realm of it, maybe some might go down to Connecticut or whatever, if you're on the backside of town and things like that. But for the most part, it's coming back into town. So I see that this water permit has been neglected for years. So if we have an opportunity to kind of get in front of it, maybe boost our usage. So when they come to look at it and they say, oh, wow, you guys are using quite a bit more water per capita, but a lot of our we have a lot of open space too. You know, so when you look at our open space compared to how many people we have, you know, that should factor into the usage of the water too. You know, because if you have
Yeah.
a lot of high density populated areas like, you know, Westfield has, there's 10,000 people who don't even have a lawn kind of thing. So that's why their per capita usage can go down
Yeah. Be careful what
substantially.
you wish for.
We have no apartments,
Yeah,
right,
not
or
yet,
apartment
but-
buildings, so
Yeah,
that's,
Look
You
at
can
the
get
new,
1,000 units of Section 8 housing to get
Right.
that town.
well, look at the new master plan and that's coming. There's gonna be, based on the trajectory right now, there is mixed development coming. That's, you look at a housing production plan, I've seen a lot of things coming through, so. You know, maybe we need to get ready for that too. We're gonna have some issues in the next couple of years. But I think restricting our water usage for people who are paying the most for the water. Is a bad idea. And if we have the argument and we have the ability. To not fine people, yeah, we can go with the DEP's permit and say, hey, we're in water restrictions, but there's. No reason for it, you know, we've argued that point until DEP comes in and makes it a point, but they're gonna come. They're gonna come whether we use it or not, you know, if they've already gone to Westfield and things like that, they're coming regardless. So I think we get out in front of it and say, hey, we're using this much water. Over a period of time, you need to look at it like that.
Yeah.
we're drafting our statistical report now, and one question that I know they haven't asked us to report on yet, but I've heard rumors that they will ask in the future is. Your enforcement process, okay, your restrictions for these months. Who's getting reinforced, how is the enforcement happening, who's getting warnings, who's getting fines? They're gonna wanna see us report back on that.
Yeah.
They don't right now.
For a
They had
long
that, that's
time,
not on
we-
this year's report, but I can imagine some point soon that it will be a reporting requirement.
For a long time, I don't remember anyone doing any fines or anything, tracking it, you know, now it's easier. We started last year, 2 years ago.
Like 2 years ago, we did it, I don't think we did it, so last year,
Really get a lot.
we only had we had 3 short windows, right? And the
Right,
way we had
right.
set it up was like, you know, you got your warning and then you got like a month grace period. And then we never really had that next month, you know,
Right.
where they got, you know, that grace was kind of kicked in.
2
So
years
a
ago, we.
couple years ago, we set
Right.
several fines out, yes.
Yeah.
I think even 2 years ago, I don't think we did, maybe it was 22, we had
Yeah,
the
we
year,
had-
something like
23,
that, yeah.
24.
we got
I think we sent
aggressive
out.
with it and we hadn't been before, so
Yeah,
we could just kind of lax. Just lax and see what happens, let them. But
I just see that the point of the restriction.
and
The
then,
only other point of it is to just physically or just be in charge of how much water someone can use.
Yeah.
And that, I don't think
make
that's
your
our,
lawn turn brown and then charge them anyways.
yeah. So I think
I understand that, you
if
know, maybe,
Springfield,
maybe the best solution is rather than go to the selectmen and ask them to remove the fines, is just get too busy to enforce them, you know, because I think if it hits the paper that we're not gonna fine anybody for disregarding the water restriction, especially after Westfield just got,
It was in the front page of the
well, I
paper.
think we'll have people flocking here who wanna have a nice lawn. Until Springfield, that's the thing, if Springfield doesn't have the restriction on how much they can sell us. Why are we restricted on how much we can purchase? That's what it-
so Springfield will be this, you know, they're a registered community, just like Westfield is, right? So in their permit. In their, I guess their registration statement, it does say that we as a wholesale community, if they're required to go on restrictions, then we are required to go on restrictions. I'm not sure if it has anything about the fining in there, but there is language where we have to go on restrictions when they do.
Which is, I
So
mean,
they will be going in restrictions, just like Westfield and West Springfield and everybody else is just.
so I think we should. Wait until that happens to start to try to enforce it again, you know, cause at this point. We're basically telling people, you can't
mean,
water your lawn
we could-
because,
we could just get lax on enforcement. And when they come calling, just say, nobody else is in restriction, just Southwick, why are we
That's-
finding our people, and just say, we're not gonna do it, they're paying for the water, it's going into the aquifer.
exactly, well, that's
And just-
what I'm saying, yeah.
You know,
exactly.
we could literally do that.
But
I
if it's a
think
town
anything, I think
bylaw,
anything you do that'll get you in the paper saying we're
Well, I'm
going
sure this
against the
meeting will
deed.
get us in the paper regardless.
You
This is,
know,
it's
know.
already gonna be, it'll be everywhere, but I
Water
think,
meeting is pretty.
I would
boring.
rather-
I did notice when we raised the rates, we were in there. Even I was in there, but my name wasn't mentioned, so I'm happy.
but that's what's, then we have the thing where now we're going against the town bylaw, which that's not a good look for anybody. And then there could be, because of all the data we have on water usage, then they could go back and make us, the select board could require us to go back and retroactively fine people for water they use, because we now have all this data. I mean, it's not an accident that they want these SCADA systems in place. But until there's a water restriction in Springfield and they won't sell us water where we're not allowed to use water, I think we should revisit that bylaw or let the select board,
I
we can
mean,
say, hey,
I'd be all right with not getting aggressive with fines as long as West Springfield's not in a water restriction. You know what I mean? We could put up the signs, but if West Springfield's hauling out of our aquifer and they're not restricted just because of the type of permit.
then the
Just
part,
because of the name of the permit
yeah,
that we're operating under.
it's not necessarily in the name of environmental preservation. It's strictly
You know,
just saying, hey, you're not allowed to
Especially
do
since
this because we say
we're
it.
bringing the water into the aquifer for them to use and our people are paying for it.
Well, so since we have that capability, I wouldn't advocate for us to overuse our permit. But if we have the option to purchase as much water as Springfield will sell us, then there's no point in
Yeah,
going into restriction.
now, when we had that real tight summer with all this stuff, we had made some upgrades. We did we did one well, we did the lining on the transmission line.
Mhm.
I mean,
That was
so
after
we're in good shape now if we had a really,
Yeah, so Jerry Jai was installed in 2020 was the year, the first year Jerry Jai was constructed online. So that was the summer.
Mhm.
It was after that. It was early 2020, so the pump station was online. We did upgrade well well two. I'm trying to remember when we did that. If it was before or after that
I
summer
think that was
2020.
before, but we didn't just
Before,
do something.
but then we
about
did
one
the-
last year.
And we
the
just
main
did well,
upgrade.
we just did well two, well one, the
One,
smaller
did
one. We
one,
did that one
right.
last year.
But then we upgraded the water main from Springfield Water in Westfield
Yes.
down College
Yeah.
Highway.
there
And
a
that was-
problem- there
that
a
was
problem with
after-
that, Yeah.
Right.
Yes, that was after.
That was after.
After, yeah.
We
So
had
we,
to reline it or something to.
yeah,
to get
they
the
burst the
proper
pipe
flow.
and
Yeah,
made it bigger.
Yeah, so we are able to withdraw about 1,200 gallons a minute out of Jerry Drive.
So that's where I'm saying, we upgraded the pipe for the purpose of being able to draw more water. But now we're saying we're not gonna do that because we have this water restriction based on the aquifer, but not based on our capacity to draw water.
Here's the kicker. Springfield has a pump in the Westfield River to pump water up to Cowell Mountain if they start running low.
So that's where this water restriction, it really, when you.
So
when
they
you start to
lower
look at
the
it,
river, we go into water restriction,
Yeah.
buy our water from them, and it's not even our water, because we don't even use that.
Yeah.
Aquifer.
So that's why I feel like this water restriction, putting our water users into water restriction based on the arguments we've had
It's like,
here.
it's like
is-
any law, though, it starts with a good intention, but you can
Yeah,
And it's
go
gotten to
round
this
and
point,
round and
yeah.
round and fight with them. I mean, essentially. When you're spraying water on the ground, it's recharging the aquifer.
If anything, we should make people buy more water and spray it on the ground during water restriction, because we're getting it from Springfield and we need to refill it, but that's
Until
kind of the thing.
until they run out, then they
You know-
pump it out of the Westfield River, and then Westfield has no water, and
Well, they'll pump it up to the reservoirs up there, but that's the thing, our job is to maintain a water system. To provide water to these people. And that's where we, being elected, we're not town employees, we have that ability to say, hey, I think this is a problem. And the people that have elected us are upset about it, and this is something we can do. To change that, and we've done upgrades to get the water.
yeah.
There's other things that don't factor into the per capita usage. Or to the water restrictions that are physically doing the same process, spraying water on the ground. So I think to find our
I know
water users and limit their
it's great
usage.
to do, it's great to do some things proactively, but I think in this case, it might be better to ask for forgiveness, you know, after the fact and try to provoke anything, because they're just, you know, you get their attention and they're just gonna do, they will do something,
Oh, yeah.
you know, and we're not in a position to be able to say, well, we're doing a great job for the environment, because they got all these things that we're already not taking care of and can't, you know, we're a farming community that has very sparse population, and you know, they all wanna water their lawns, and they all wanna have gardens, and they all wanna do a bunch of stuff, and the water restriction is high, where you go into Westfield or whatever, and they got 1,500, 2,000 units of Section 8 housing, and those people don't even have a washing machine.
Yeah.
You know, they go to a commercial user who isn't under a water restriction. So, you know,
Or they use a car wash, you know, that's the more populated areas, you go into a car wash,
Yeah.
which that's a separate issue from us, is the stormwater problem that you could create from car washing as one of the other restricted
Grant, can
activities.
you find out what the deal is with Westfield, what they're, if the state's making them?
No, I know they are. So they're a registered community, right? So every registered community now has new restrictions. They were adopted 2 years ago, but each town was given, okay, you got 2 years to implement. So this is the year 2 for every registered state, every community in the state.
Did you
So
find
when,
what the fine is?
oh, what the fine is for sure, yeah.
Yeah, I should have kept the paper,
Okay.
but it was
take a
stated
look.
right in there what the fines were gonna be,
Yeah,
and I don't know if they were the same as ours or not, I can't remember.
I'll look.
Yeah, I think the point of finding people is. There should be a reason for it, other than just being like, no, we're the government, you're not allowed to use the water. That's where, like Dave said, this town is. Is what it is because of the people who are here, and we're, you know, we're not looking to the government to supply us with anything that we're
I know,
not paying
we're-
for.
we're kind of a hybrid, you know, the east side of town is suburban. You go on the other side of, on the other side of College Highway, it's farm
For now.
country, you know, and there's a clear division. And half of our town has been built as a suburb. And the other half of the town was left as farm, so there's just, you know, we have only one half of the town is serviced by the water system, and the other half it's free reign. You put a 5-acre lawn out,
Oh, yeah,
you know, on Granville Road, and you can water it till the cows come home.
oh, yeah.
And there's
Part of the
nothing-
problem too is, you know, on that side of town, it's all sand, so there was no water retention. You gotta water a lot to keep
Yeah.
that grass.
But it's going down into the aquifer. So if, I mean, that's where this water restriction. There is no, right now. I've worked with Springfield Water, they dump their reservoir to do. Maintenance, you know, they'll bring it down 20 feet.
Yeah.
There's plenty of water. I think this is a control issue from the higher ups in the higher part of the government, you know, as far as the state house or
Yeah.
whatever, but.
A lot of it comes from the eastern part of the state, where they really need a water management act, and they
Yeah.
need.
Because they have so many people using water.
Yeah.
Just on a daily basis, because there's such a high population density, and that's their problem to deal with. But if we can prove that, hey, this is our own essentially closed system. That we're not quite maxing out, but then we have this ability to buy water somewhere else. I mean, that's where we can say, this is Southwick, come here because you can use all the water you want.
Yeah,
You know, and it's not detrimental to the environment. That's the whole thing. If the DEP is involved, I feel like environmental protection, we're not protecting the environment. We're just gonna find people and limit their water usage because we say so.
reasons.
That's. So, I mean, it might not be a maybe it's not something you wanna push to the select board, but I think as a water commission, it sounds like, you know, we agree that the fine is kind of just punitive, but with no intention, you know, no long
The
term.
the only benefit I can see of fining is showing the DEP that we're active. So, you know, we're actively managing, trying to make sure that the water conservation is on everybody's mind, but. You know,
But for what reason? You know, at this
Yeah.
point, the
I know,
only reason
they're
is,
certainly not moving very quickly to get us a permit.
the only reason is because I said so. You know, it's not to help our
Exactly.
aquifer, it's not to help Springfield water and sewers, reservoirs. You know, is it to reduce the amount of chlorine that's being used to treat the water? You could argue that, but that's not what anybody ever says, you know, so they're not even thinking about that, because they make us increase the amount of chlorine. It's literally, you can't do this because we say so, and I think that's a problem for the eastern part of the state to take care of, but out here. We maintain this system, Springfield will sell it to us, we're a good customer to them, we did $1 million worth of upgrades plus to get that water to us. You know, to have, and especially because we're 94% residential usage. As far as the whole town goes on everything. This isn't gonna affect anybody but the townspeople who are paying property taxes on their nice lawns because the lawns are nice. That's why these neighborhoods, you know, however you wanna argue it, but. You know, to have a fine because DEP says so. DEP is another government organization, a government body. You know, to protect the environment, but that's not what they're doing. They're just trying to be punitive. You know, for no reason. That's why I see, you know, and especially talking about this more in depth, it just seems like this water restriction is, you know, it's just an overstep of.
I can see why everybody gets upset when Southwick gets put into a water because we have a permit and West Springfield isn't because they have a
Right.
registered system. I can see why people would be upset.
People are very upset and very vocal.
So,
And especially once the spray park goes through and that gets turned on with no separate metering, you know. They can water the sports fields, they can turn the spray park on. But the people who are paying for that water can't do the same at their own house, you know, because the taxpayers are gonna pay the water bill at Wally Park. The taxpayers are the same people who are buying water from this water system to use on their lawns as they see fit. And I don't think we have any good reason to restrict that usage. It doesn't protect the environment. We have the water, we have the available water and we have the capability to provide it. So to restrict it is just an overstep.
yeah. Yeah, I just thought that. Whenever you ask, they're just gonna probably overstep a little more. You know?
Yeah, so I think now people are gonna know that. There's not gonna be much of a follow through with the water restriction issue, but maybe now we'll see as a soft opening as the summer goes,
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
I don't think people.
we can
are-
always go back and find them.
And I don't think
We can always
people
go
are,
back to finding people if it doesn't work for us.
you know, and if it becomes a legitimate issue where like, hey, we are running these pumps into the ground. And it's gonna cause a problem to the whole system, then that's a legitimate reason, you know, we can say, hey, this is affecting our water system, we need to cut back. But that's not based on the drought conditions or whatever, you know, and I feel like there's so many people trying to find more. To regulate and more to look into and more ways to get people to do different things and sell low flow, you know, faucets and whatnot, but you know. This is Southwick and we've been we've upgraded our system, we've been ahead of a lot of the problems, and I think to find people and to have this water restriction is. Something that we can do. To benefit the whole town, you know.
All right, well, I got one thing, if I can bring it up. This came from the old lady, so don't get on me. There's a rain barrel company, what do they call it? The Great American Rain Barrel Company, they have community programs and we're not part of it. So I don't know if you wanted to try and
So here,
do that as a, hey, look what we're doing.
I like that idea, I like the rain barrel, I do like to conserve water and not have to put it through.
Mhm.
The water system, right? But, this is a perfect example of why this water restriction is a problem. Because you're not allowed to use water, but go to this organization and buy this rain barrel because you're not allowed to use water. But you can, you know, I like the rain barrel idea, I know Agawam's doing it. But this just ties back into, you know, why can't we use water? Well, because we'll sell a lot more rain barrels through this Rain Barrel Act. I would be all for going, I mean, I know what you're,
I'm just, because the community program is really not much. They buy the barrel and We just provide them a place to pick it up at the DPW.
Yeah, so I'll get off the topic of the water restriction. We can just discuss the rain barrel thing. I saw that in Agawam. I think it's a great idea. You know, there's a lot of places, you know, that you can collect fresh water to use on your garden and stuff like that. I don't know if Randy's
I
familiar.
know,
with
like
that.
you
I
said,
am, yeah, I think you can buy them, you know, at bulk and then you would probably sell a nominal charge, you know, maybe a cost cover charge to the resident and then you schedule a pickup date and time and.
So in
yeah,
Agawam,
I think they handle it all.
Yeah.
You go right to their website, you buy it. It gets shipped to the Southwick DPW and they pick it up. We
Yeah.
basically just use that. I mean, you could go a little farther, which I don't see going and just add like a $25 credit to your water bill if you buy a rain barrel. But that's just subsidizing someone else's business. If we just join the program and
Yeah,
let
so you
them-
get a
let the-
discount.
Let the company do all
Oh,
that.
so we
all
can
the
join,
legwork.
oh, I can look in and join it,
Yeah.
that's easy.
So I think I did look into it in Agawam, because in Agawam, I got the letter for it. And if you were to buy the rain barrel as a Southwick resident, I think it was like $125 or something like that. If you were to buy it through as an Agawam resident through their program, it was like 80 something, you know, so there was a substantial savings. So I mean, I think that would be a great program, because that's a good way that people can decide to save money. You know, we can offer that. to-
Especially people who are in the east side of town where the lots are smaller, they can run it to their flower gardens and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
and it's rainwater, you know, it's
And they
untreated.
don't have to pay us,
Chlorinated.
Right.
they don't have to pay us to put the water on their lawn, you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
on their stuff, so. Just to become part of the system, it seemed like it would be a pretty easy thing to do. And I think it would give us some,
You check into
And
that,
and I
Randy?
think that would
Yeah,
help with
some
our
grace.
DEC.
a little bit of grace when they come looking for us.
Yeah,
Sure.
so that, we could vote on that. I mean, I would make a motion to
Right.
pursue that rain barrel program. And
I make a second that motion.
All in favor, aye. Johnson, aye.
Dave Meswar, aye.
John Kane, yes.
We'll do that and we'll take you in next meeting.
'Cause I don't think there's a negative to that, you know, that's just giving people options,
Yeah,
you know.
and if it saves them a little money to buy a rain barrel,
There's no cost to the town, right?
Cause I have a rain barrel I use for my chickens, right? So, and I had to buy it on Amazon or whatever, but through this program, I probably would have to pay a little bit less money, and you can use it however you want, you know, if you wanna use it, you know, to water your lawn or whatever. So I think that gives them more options.
Yeah, they have like 5 different rain barrel options on here. I'm just looking at it now.
You bring that to the next meeting?
Yep. We'll do.
And there was a deadline for Agawam. You had to have your order in by whatever, but I mean, this might not be, you know,
April 4th.
yeah. So it might not be this year that we get on the list, but they might extend it for a new applicant.
Right.
yeah.
But yeah, I think I think a lot of people would like that option too.
We'll do.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of granola, crunchy, huggy people like that.
I mean, it's clean water, you know, so if you can save a
You
little
don't have
bit.
to pay for it.
And especially if you have a spot that's, you know, away from you don't have to run a water hose. That's why I did it, because my chickens are like 200 feet from my house. And in the wintertime, I had to run a hose and like, you know, drip it and put a water heater in the bowl and everything. So we made that self-watering system with a rain barrel. So it's nice.
April 17th.
So,
I might not be here.
see that? Get an attaboy from the state and I'll go home and get one from the old lady
See,
today.
you know, helping everybody.
And I got her popsicles yesterday.
Oh,
Wow.
those were good popsicles.
I don't know how much,
Oh, from,
I don't know how much trouble that's gonna get me out of the next time I get
what,
in.
Joe Didi, the popsicles?
Yeah, popsicles, fudgicles.
Fudgicles from
Fudgicles there?
the hood, Fontana Dairy, right?
No, Malicious. He couldn't get
He's
the,
his own.
yeah, he couldn't get the recipe, so he had to figure it out himself, and
Yeah, he figured it out.
he had 4 iterations of it that we tasted from worst to best as far as they were concerned.
Yeah.
And then his son is doing popsicles,
Oh,
all good ingredients, you know, all natural stuff, no additives,
nice.
you know, no dyes or anything like that.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna be around on the 17th, I'm out of town. I won't be able to Zoom either, so.
Oh,
You wanna
no,
change?
I should be back April 17th. Let me
Or
see.
should for the 17th then, or,
Yeah, because that's the week before Easter and
Yeah.
my daughter's gonna.
well,
be
it's the week
here.
of Easter.
Yeah,
There's
I'm
probably-
going down to help her fly back with the kids, but it's gonna be probably the 13th or 14th, and I'll be back home by the 17th, so I'll be around on the 17th.
Well, John said he's not available the 17th.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't have anything important, super pressing or anything major.
I don't think we're probably, will we?
I'll talk of the rain barrel. I mean, nothing right now that is,
Right.
is.
Cause the bill won't
pressing.
go out till,
Bills will be probably hitting the mailboxes right around that time frame,
Yeah,
maybe the
by the
week
time we get
afterwards.
any-
Yeah,
yeah,
nothing,
claims will
no
be next-
abatements,
yeah,
no, so.
okay.
Yeah,
well, we'll
That's
keep it
fine.
for the 17th for now, unless something changes.
Yeah, we can also not put something that's.
Yeah. If
you
something
know,
really.
More,
comes up, yeah.
more generic, items on the
Yeah.
agenda, and wait till John's back. It's
Yeah,
fine.
that's fine.
I have a motion for adjournment.
I make a motion to adjourn with all prejudice.
Second,
Second,
all in favor, Johnson, aye.
Dave Meswar, aye.
John Kane, yes.
Okay, good.